Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's ILTA webinar, What's Happening in CRM Today. I'm Gail Persicelli, and I'll be serving as your moderator. Our speaker today is Jeff Hemming, who is the product manager for Ticket's marketing solution portfolio. I'd like to thank Ticket for sponsoring today's webinar. Our presentation will run about 30 to 45 minutes, and we ask that you submit all questions to the Q&A box. And if those are not answered during the presentation, we will address them at the end. Before we start, please know that we are recording today's webinar, and we will post a link to our website under recordings shortly after today's presentation. I will now turn over the webinar to Jeff.
Great, thank you very much, Gail, and thank you very much for everybody that's participating in today's session. As Gail mentioned, we're going to be talking about legal CRM today and offering you some observations that we see from Ticket. Not being a direct CRM provider in the market, it's always fun to see what we're looking at and offer it up. Just before we go in and talk about CRM, a couple of things in terms of your sponsor. A little bit of the Ticket portfolio here for us in North America. We have 3 different products that we're working with. Many of you will know us through our e-marketing Carpe piece, and then we have our template solution. Big thing, we've been in the community for the better part of the last 20 years. We have dedicated teams here in North America for all of the offerings, and we're backed by a global communications firm, British Telecom. And in addition to what we're doing in the market, we do partner with a number of the main players in the market. Certainly in the CRM space today, LexisNexis with their interaction product is still very much out there, which we'll talk about a bit later. But we're also working with some of the other sort of up-and-coming providers in the space, being Microsoft and Salesforce.com. So enough of the sponsors piece. Actually, if I get this going in the right direction. A little bit about myself. Those that have attended other presentations that I've done will know this. I come out of the legal community. The last firm I worked with was a large Canadian firm, McCarthy Tétrault. I've worked with and for CRM for the last 15 years, both inside and outside of law firms. And there's some other stuff here in terms of product, but really what I want to bring is that what I've observed in the 15 years, both within the community and outside the community, and having worked with a number of different platforms. So a little bit about the story that I'd like to walk through, or the view that I would like to offer to you. Certainly the talking points that are here, really we're going to start by actually stepping away from CRM and say, well, why do we even want to consider this? What are sort of the reasons for looking at CRM? Look at what's changing, and then get into what we consider CRM, what our options are like today, and then some of the things that are driving. And at the end of it, as we like to do with PowerPoint, offer you a slide with what we see as the directions that you might want to go. So in terms of that first part of the story and that notion of stepping back, I think it's very important for us to do this, because as we'll see, and there'll be variants in this stat, but the majority of CRM implementations out there, some will say fail, but they're certainly not as successful as we would like them to be. And I think it's a very real question to ask is, well, why aren't they successful? A lot of things will go and say, well, it's the people, it's the technology, it's this, it's that. But we really look at it, or I would say look at it from it's a bit more fundamental even than that side of it. And it goes to some stuff that I was reading a little while ago by Jonathan Furlong, and he was looking at what is the nature of a company. So, at the end of the day, why do we get up out of bed, go into this office, and work for this whatever organization is that we're working for? And I like the way he looked at it. Companies are really about these 6 different points. It's about reducing your transaction costs, so that I could certainly do a lot of what I do already, but it's going to cost me a lot because I have to do it each time on my own. So companies help us reduce that notion of cost. It builds not just a culture, but a valuable culture. So something that, it's our brand, it's how we look at the world, it's how we present to the world, and that has a value to it. So it's a way of, not only delivering products, but increasing value. It's a way of organizing production. So it's not just Jeff sitting there going, well, this is the way I do it. and Gail doing it the way she does it, but we bring together the different pieces that are for conducting the business. So we can have a salesperson, we can have a marketer, we can have this, we can have that. It's a way of organizing. It's also a way of building up knowledge. So this one was sort of interesting to me because I never really looked at a company in that regard, but it's, as we do go through the process, as we build these cultures, we actually build a body of knowledge. And then from all of that, we can use it to spur innovation. So it's not just doing the same thing over and over again, but we can do it better, whatever better means to us. So using that as a definition of a company, it gives us a perspective of saying, well, how does a law firm stack up? Where does it fit in this notion of that philosophical company? So on the right-hand side here, we have some of the things that we see in that stack. Traditionally, and I'll speak here in the traditional sense of law firms, because there's certainly a lot of change going on in the marketplace today. Traditionally, law firms have a fairly weak and fragmented culture. Again, that's changing in some law firms, but it's still pretty accurate across the board. We have different ways of doing things within law firms. Not only, challenge for big law firms, but even within, one-office law firms, different practice areas will approach how they deliver their services differently, or can. The way that we assign work, again, because we're not having a consistent process across the different areas of the firm, tends to be regarded as inefficient. It's also looked at as being inefficient because we generally don't use technology to help in how we do our work. Yes, we all have iPhones or Android phones, and yes, we use email, but the adoption of things like project management software or even process management software that helps us track in a consistent way isn't widely adopted in the legal community. And that notion of knowledge sharing. Certainly within your practice areas, you'll have sharing of information, but generally once we get outside of our own little areas, or I shouldn't say little, but once we get outside of our areas of focus, we don't share information very readily. We've certainly looked at tools to help us with that, but it's still something that is a challenge within a lot of firms. So I use this as that positioning piece because it gives us a different lens at looking at how CRM works, and I would submit how it's been successful or not. So moving forward in that notion of why isn't CRM successful, and looking at some very specific things in the world of legal. It's getting a little bit old now, but back in June of 2015, ACCRT did a white paper, and they looked at what CRM's doing in the community. And these were their 4 biggest reasons why it was challenged or getting low adoptions. One of the biggest ones, and this is certainly something I've seen through my time, it's the accountability. Here it says accountability of the lawyers, but it's the accountability of the stakeholders. It goes back to basic implementation. If we don't have buy-in from our stakeholders, if they're not accountable to the success of the system, it's not going to work for us, or the solution, it's not going to work for us. The notion of general lack of technology proficiency. So this isn't, can we use our email, can we use our iPhone? So in some cases that may be true. It's more, are we using technology as effectively as we can in an organization? We've touched on that already, and we'll touch on it again. In many cases, we're not. One of the big ones, and certainly something I see in all the different projects we do, even within Ticket, data entry or data in general is a big issue. The more data that we have to manually enter causes issues, and hence we're seeing it reflected here. And one that I might disagree with a little bit, but again, it's out of the report, complicated interfaces. I think Apple's changed a lot of that for us in how they've brought forward the user experience and the user interface. We've certainly seen that change over the last even couple of years. But some of the big reasons that some recent reports are showing for that low adoption of CRM within firms. So stepping a little bit away from CRM for a moment, looking at some of the bigger picture issues that we're being faced with from the legal side. Now, there's lots of different issues out there. We can pick up most publications or go onto Twitter and see lots of things. But these are what we're seeing from the Ticket perspective as some of the major ones that are being faced. intense market pressures. This is probably one of the biggest and most common pieces. That notion of value for price, it's not just lower transaction cost type stuff that we're looking at, but our clients are asking us, why are we being charged so much? Where's the value for this? And in that, it's the delivery of consistent service. So I work with the IP team and I work with the real estate team. I'm getting different consistent type of service. So we're seeing a lot of our clients driving that as being, we want lower price, or we want value for what we're paying, and we want it to be consistent. We're also seeing that increase on partnerships. So this is where our clients are not coming to us just to say, hey, I want the latest on the clean energy bills that are being passed in Canada, for example. Certainly that's going to happen, but they're wanting to move away from that transactional element and have the advice that a partnership's going to offer. So they want people that are firms that understand what their business is, that have that deep background in the business so that you can get that proactive type information to help manage or head risk off before you get into that situation of having to go into litigation. One of the biggest ones that we've seen come up is the rise of in-house legal departments. Again, this isn't necessarily new to all of us, but it's certainly having an impact to us on firms. The numbers are quite staggering. We're seeing 50% increase in the number of in-house counsel that we're seeing over the last few years. A stat that I wasn't able to get put into here, there was a survey done on the size of the US legal market, pegging it at about $400 billion a year. And in terms of that number, 160 of it, so somewhere around a third, was represented by in-house counsel. A smaller number, about a quarter of that, was large firms, and then the balance was smaller firms. The big thing here is that rise of in-house legal departments are taking up a bigger chunk of the pie, and for lots of different reasons, but it's a challenge that we're being faced with. Another one that we're seeing, and this came out of a presentation that I saw earlier this year here in Toronto at a forum called LegalX, it's the factory process being applied to law firms. So, or I should take that back, it's the factory process being applied to law. And where we're seeing a lot of this innovation come from isn't necessarily law firms. It's the professional service industries, pardon me. So our Deloittes, our KPMGs, our big consulting practices are starting to look at law more as they would any other process that they see in business. So they're bringing in those project management routines, they're bringing in that process automation, they're bringing in that machine intelligence to help manage the legal issues that people are being faced with. Probably one of the biggest factors that legal's facing across the spectrum. Another big one for us in terms of the changing legal environment, and goes to my background in marketing, marketing's actually starting to matter more than it ever did. Probably the single biggest piece for that, or indicator of that, was this past year's LMA conference. There were 1,400 people in Las Vegas for the conference, biggest on record and biggest by a mile. So we're starting to see what that indicates to us is that the lawyers are waking up and starting to understand there's more to how they conduct or how they present their brand, or the fact that they have a brand. They're waking up to all of those things. So it's becoming part of the mix, and has been for a few years now, but it's really, as I say, with LMA, it seems to confirm it is a legitimate partner in how law is done and the changes that are coming up. And then the last piece to emphasize here, or to look at, are compliance requirements. So certainly there's legal compliance that lawyers have always had to deal with, but we're seeing new areas of it. One of the big ones that we talk to at Ticket, the notion of castles, or data and privacy and spam compliance. We're seeing it also in Europe with how they're dealing with the likes of Google and the cloud, and how data is being protected. So there's a lot more compliance that we need to be aware of from the practice or the execution of business that we wouldn't have had to be aware of in the past. So that brings us to the starting point of, with those threads that are out there, why do we want to, or what is this thing that we're calling CRM? If you ask 10 people, you'll probably get 12 answers or 12 definitions of what CRM is. The one that I've got here in the lower left-hand corner comes from a fellow named David Cummings at Cool Life CRM, I believe is his firm. But it really struck with me because CRM is not a tactic, it is not technology, as it's been defined here by Dave. It's a tool to nurture and develop real relationships with real people. And that's really the big part out of there that CRM resonates. It means it isn't a tactic, it's a strategy that we're looking at. And it's really about understanding who these people are that we want to either engage with in terms of an acquisition strategy, or our clients that we need to be aware of to do the retention strategies that we need to look at. So that's really the starting point as we go beyond these issues that we're dealing with. The graphic on the right here, my data's gone a little bit off. I don't have the reference for it, but this is looking at the top end of the legal market, the biggest firms, that 70% of the firms have some form of CRM where 30% don't. So you can see that very first comment about half of them aren't working or failing has a big impact. So in terms of those solutions of that 70% that are being used, this comes out of last year's ILTA survey. This is another thread that I'm just going to interject into the conversation here. This is a breakdown of the technology solutions that are being offered to us. And oddly enough, or I shouldn't say oddly enough, maybe not unsurprisingly, Outlook, because that's where most of us live, is viewed as a CRM solution. Based on what we've just defined, I would discount that, so we'll just take out that top bar of it. And what it's showing us is what many of us are already familiar with. In that enterprise space, Interaction is still the biggest player. They have 50% of the market, pardon me, 57% of the market. And then we have Contactees, which really slots into more of the mid-size end of the market. So those are incumbents that we're looking at today. Interaction certainly has some stiff headwinds coming at it. The newcomers, the biggest ones being Salesforce.com, either is the native platform or there is one place that's making some great inroads these days. And then Thomson Reuters, I've set them separate from Microsoft, though they are using Microsoft technology. They've done a very good bundle of offering what CRM means to the community, and they have their specific view to it, whereas Microsoft here is Microsoft Dynamics. So if you will, the out-of-the-box Microsoft as much as we can call Microsoft out of the box. So that's what we're seeing as newcomers in the CRM space in terms of solutions. And then we have another area which I'm going to talk about in a few moments here, the concept of non-CRM. I'll define that in a moment, but we're seeing some other players here. Certainly I would put Outlook into that category. Grabit's doing some interesting stuff in this space, and ourselves at Ticket are doing some interesting stuff in the non-CRM space. And there's lots of other firms that are out there. I picked some of those, partly because of my bias working for the sponsor here today, but also other ones that we're seeing getting some traction in the space as well. But this is what we're looking at in terms of the solutions that are on offer. So things that are changing that incumbent and newcomer mix for us. There's certainly the legacy of Interaction. Anybody that's been in the space for a while is quite well aware of it in the community. They do a great job, especially around the relationship intelligence side of the picture. Some of the challenges that have come up around it stem out of those things that are driving the bigger changes in legal. That notion of being able to deliver, more consistent service, that deeper understanding about the nature of people's businesses. Some of the other solutions are just offering that in different ways, but they're offering it nonetheless. So what we're starting to see is a tipping point. I thought it might have been last year, but we're at a point now where we're starting to see some traction with those other providers. So if you're looking at CRM, to be aware of that sort of thing, if you're just coming into the space or trying to figure out what to look at it, quite honestly, from our perspective, it's a fragmenting world. So it's an interesting world because there's lots of opportunities, but that notion that we've had of things being consistent is falling away for us. So having said that, it's not meant to be scary. It's more to say this is what we're looking at in the world. We are at an inflection point or a tipping point. At the end of the day, it's still going to do those type of things that we need it to do. just leveraging new technology. That's been one of the biggest challenges, and we faced it at Ticket. When you're legacy in a market or been in a market for a very long time, you've got a great product. It works very well. The challenge is when you get the disruption of mobile services that have come in. Certainly Apple has been a big lead on that, but in general, moving away from desktop-bound solutions into a solution that you can access anywhere, it's a new way of getting at the same questions, if you will. They're also, the newcomers are extending the offerings in ways that we haven't had before. One of the big ones, just to use a concrete example for it, the notion of pipeline management. Outside of legal, that is a very big part of how we do business. It's managing our sales pipeline. Managing our proposal pipeline would be another way to look at it within the legal community. But those are things that are becoming more important. We need to understand where that stuff is. And these new offerings can do a very good job of that. So shifting a little bit here to come back to a thread that was introduced, but just to expand on that, is this notion of a non-CRM solution. So what we're looking at here is something that's not big. So we're not looking at something that's necessarily multiple servers internally or offering a wide range of modules outside of what our needs are. And what's driving it is that notion that 80% of what we do is being done with 20% of the solutions that we have. So it's being able to hone in on what are those core areas that we're working with and making sure that we're using that technology to address it. It's a way of getting around some of those limitations that we saw at the beginning of the presentation with accountability or technology adoption. We basically, with the non-CRM solutions, take the attorney out of the mix to a certain extent, or certainly reduce them as being a key element for the success of what we're doing. So the example that I wanted to use here is represented in the graphic that we have on the right of what a non-CRM can do for us. And generally, what we're seeing on the ticket side of things, we're looking at it where you're dealing with spreadsheet chaos or Excel hell, I like to call it. That notion of if we were sending out a communication, I start with one list and end up with 10 by the time I've circulated it. Or if I'm managing my proposals, I start out with a master Excel spreadsheet of the 8 or 9 proposals that we work on, and then that gets circulated to the team, and I end up again with multiples of what the original spreadsheet was. So in the example that we have here, we have a central place where we're going to keep our information, generally looking at some sort of a database. The example I'm going to use here comes out of the marketing world. So we'll have a place where we keep all of our contacts, where we keep all of our preferences so that we understand what people want from us. In this case, it's going to be championed by the marketing department. They're going to do what they do in terms of presenting their content. So they'll put the invitation together. They'll create that newsletter. They'll create that alert. It will get pushed out through whatever channels that the firm is working with. Certainly one would be email. We'll have different social media channels like LinkedIn potentially. Whatever we're working with for our channels, that information will be pushed out. It will arrive with our clients. They will engage with it as they do. They may not. They may open it and just say, I'm not interested. Or they may go all the way down the rabbit hole and answer the different things that we're asking them in terms of calls to action. Once our clients or our contacts have engaged with that, that information is going to come back into the firm so that we can report on it, so that we can understand what people were doing. It can be as simple as they've said, yes, they're coming to the webinar. Yes, they want to receive these types of communications, that sort of thing. But it's going to come back into our central database so that we can then reuse it. So again, the big piece here is we focused on the particular need that we have. We have a solution that will allow us to communicate with our clients or reach out to our clients and then leverage the information that they're providing back to us. That's one of the notions of CRM, a non-CRM solution. And we're winding down here. I've got about 3 slides after this to have a look at. But one of the things that, as I was preparing for this, I realized I forgot to put in earlier, it's the notion of the cloud. So this is another one of the sort of 5 or 6 threads that have been woven or brought into the conversation here. So we're all well aware of the cloud now. It's pretty much ubiquitous for what we're doing in our own personal lives. Certainly a number of firms are going well down the road to the cloud. The cloud being that off-premise remote place where we can do whatever it is we need to do our email marketing campaigns, do our document management, do whatever it is we're going to do. We bring it up here in terms of in the context of CRM, because there's a couple drivers for it and a couple considerations that we're seeing resonating in the marketplace. So why are firms driving towards the cloud? It's that notion of versatility. We're not chained to our desk to work with our CRM application. We can get to it on our smartphone. We can get to it if we're working from our home office. We can get to it if we have an internet connection while we're waiting at an airport or a train station or wherever we happen to be. So it's that notion of mobility. The other side that we're seeing driving the cloud is flexibility. Because of the technology that goes into making a cloud solution work for us, we see it really go one of 2 ways. One, it can be very much out of the box and preset, so it's easy to use. It can also be very flexible for us, so we can configure it and work with it in ways that we may not have been able to do with some of our incumbent solutions. So there's the perception of the cloud solutions can be more flexible for us. And then probably one of the biggest ones is the notion of cost. And I'll talk to cost a little bit in considerations as well, but generally the pricing model for cloud solutions have been lower costs or more innovative ways of pricing it than we would if we're doing on-premise. On-premise sort of solutions tend to be more buy it up front and then own it, whereas our cloud model tends to be more of a rental model or subscription model. So we can play with costs there a little bit. And there's also efficiencies that come into that sort of cost mix, and that we're not having to go up with our own technology. So I don't have to go out and invest in more technology within my organization. I can just buy this cloud solution. It's very quick to get set up because I just log into a site and do what I need to do. So there's some of the drivers. Considerations that we're seeing on it. There's always going to be something around security. Now, the stuff that's in the cloud is as secure as it's going to be. It has to be. That's the nature of the cloud businesses. It's still a consideration, though. There's a number of different sort of things floating around under the surface with security. Certainly what we've seen out of the UK, out of Europe with Google and how they're working, was it Google or Facebook, and the safe harbor stuff that was done, where folks are wanting data to be stored locally, so it's not being under other jurisdictions. There's also stuff kicking around about what information is being captured and what is actually accessible. One of the big ones about a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, in the EU was around metadata and how that's accessed and what folks have the ability to do with it. Another consideration is lack of integration in platforms. As much as the cloud, I've got in quotes here, can be perceived as ubiquitous and it's just out there, one of the challenges with it is that we're seeing the clouds form, if you will, clusters. Silos is what we might have called them before, where you've got a Microsoft cloud, you've got an Amazon cloud, you've got something for Google, you've got something for Apple. They don't necessarily talk to each other. So if you're having to use, or if you're using various of these clouds, how do you integrate with them? Something that the market just hasn't evolved far enough. So if you're doing a lot of integration with CRM or looking to do integration with CRM, it's something to be aware of. I'd mentioned cost as one of the drivers for the cloud. One of the things that we're seeing, and there's been some writings over the last year or so on the cost of the cloud. When it was starting up, it was pretty much technology focused. So how do we build the data centers? How do we build the technology to make it work? And that's where the costing was done. We're starting to see increases in costs because the cloud firms are going, oh, we sort of forgot this notion of sales and marketing costs. So that notion of we need to go out and see our clients, we need to go to trade shows. For pure cloud organizations, if they haven't addressed this as part of their pricing model, and a lot haven't, we're starting to see that cost number that they were talking to increase because As we all know, going to trade shows is not an inexpensive thing to do from a business perspective. And then the other side, and I've alluded to this as part of the security side of things, are data regulations. We are starting to see sections of the world, EU being one of them, pushing back on what information can be stored where. There's been some very recent stuff that's come out of Russia on, in the consumer side of things, potentially blocking Facebook, potentially blocking stuff from Google. Now, it's early days, but that is a risk to us from the cloud perspective. If countries or blocks of countries decide to change how they manage their data, it opens us up to things we just need to plan for and be aware of. Sort of my closing comment here to the cloud side of things, what we're seeing, certainly interest at the very large firm side, but we're really seeing the biggest impact for the mid-sized firms, primarily for those drivers that we've looked at before. The balance between the drivers and consideration seems to be a little more favorable in the mid-market. That notion of not having to buy more servers or more database licenses or more whatever technology, combined with the versatility and the security that the cloud can offer those firms, it works out very well. In larger firms, we are seeing that move towards the cloud, though some of them will still say, and I was involved with a Canadian bank here a couple of years back, they looked at it and said, we do all of this stuff already at the same level as the cloud provider. So they, in fact, started to pull back from some of the cloud stuff they were working on. So some thoughts and considerations there for cloud. What does all this stuff mean? What is Jeff, thrown out at us here for the last half hour in these various threads that are there? So this is meant to be the screen that brings all of those together for us. And we really see sort of two camps, if you will, for where are we going to go with CRM, or where is CRM going to go? And simply, if your firm is being impacted by those market forces that we looked at before, or these considerations with CRM that we looked at before, then you want to go down that path of CRM. So if your culture is changing, if you're moving from that acquisition to more retention-focused approach to it, if you're moving to that more centralized, if you will, branded view of the firm, that, if we call ourselves ABCco, for example, we're going to do things consistently from a cultural perspective, then CRM will help us with that, because it promotes that understanding of our clients and allows us to pick up those parts of our culture and drive it to our clients. Out of this comes our competitive advantage, because we'll have that element that's tied to our culture, that piece that's tied to the knowledge of our contacts and clients that we're working with. Retention focus, I've mentioned here. Out of this culture, because CRM is that strategic way of looking at things, it will help promote that consistency of process that we need to deal with. We'll do, for example, proposals in a consistent way. We'll have consistent ways of reporting on the results of those proposals. We can do marketing campaigns in a consistent way, and again, have that consistency of reporting that comes back in, so that we can actually compare things together and understand, was this impactful, was this not impactful? And then sort of part of that ultimate side of what it will do if you're being impacted by the market is it will, give you that single view of the client that you're working on, or that single view of the prospect that you're working on, so that you get that deeper understanding, or you just have that understanding that you wouldn't have if you were not in that CRM world. So that would be, if you're being impacted by the market, the forces in the market, the reason you would look at CRM. Where you may not look at CRM is if you're not being impacted by these forces. And it may be that you are being impacted, but the firm just isn't prepared to recognize it or deal with the ramification of all of these things that are going on. It may sound sort of, how could you not deal with it? Well, there's lots of different reasons. We all work in firms and have competing things that we need to deal with, and we may not be able to deal with all of these things at once. So if we're not being impacted, or if we're either not being impacted or not going to address them, this is where you may look at some sort of non-CRM solution. So those elements that will give you what you need to do at the tactical level and allow you to continue operating. So if you're not looking at having your culture change, the firm's very successful, it's been doing what it's been doing, and it can continue doing what it's doing, you're not going to change the culture. If you're looking at your solutions going, I only use a small fraction of what I'm doing, and that small fraction does most of what we plan to do, then the non-CRM is going to be good for you. Also looking at this notion around how we communicate about the firm, if all we're doing is sending out invitations and alerts, for example, and our bias here, because we work in that space, a non-CRM could work quite well for you. And with that, I hope I've offered you at least some thoughts and different ways of seeing the market. I'd like to say thank you, and we can open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, for the great presentation and for Ticket for sponsoring. Okay, folks, please utilize the Q&A box for any questions or comments. While we're waiting for any questions, I'd like to mention that a copy of the PowerPoint document and a link to the recording will be posted on our website in a few days. Shortly after today's webinar, you will receive a request to evaluate today's webinar. Take a few minutes to complete the evaluations. These are really important to us to continue to provide educational programming to you, our members. Okay, I have one question, Jeff. Can you give an example of how a proposal would be handled differently in the CRM and the non-CRM scenarios?
Sure. So it would come down to how your CRM is set up. Most of the ones that I've worked with in the legal world don't have that ability to work with proposals. You're using some sort of external tool for it. So in a well-constructed CRM, you would be able to bring in those pieces of the proposal, construct it, put it into and against your contact record, so you could see, okay, these are the 5 people that were involved in the proposal, on the client side, internally, and basically chart its way through the process and have it as part of that bigger knowledge of what you would be doing within your CRM. In the non-CRM scenarios, this would be more along the lines of your proposal generating tools that are out there, where you've got that knowledge that you need for the proposal, but it only lives within the world of the proposal generator. It doesn't link back, so that if I wanted to, for example, go and look up Jeff Hemming as a prospect that we've been trying to do business with for 2 years, I wouldn't necessarily see, well, IP did a proposal for him, Energy did a proposal for him, Transport did a proposal for him. We lose that sort of thing. Hopefully that answers the question well for you.
Okay, I have another question. How can any law firm not be impacted by the market forces? Clients everywhere are demanding more for less.
No, it's an excellent question, and that's why when I was talking to it, it's maybe that the firm is being impacted by the forces that are out there, or you can't not be impacted, but it's more, are you going to address the impact of these forces that are out there? Certainly the large law firms, I would say, feel it the most because of the nature of the larger law firms. You can get smaller firms, some of the boutique firms that are very specialized in what they do. And yes, people are asking them for, or the forces are out there pressing on this. But if you are the expert in, we'll pick on the US for a moment here, US constitutional electoral law, then people will pay almost anything for you because you've got that deep level of expertise. You may not be feeling the pinch the same way that a more generalized firm would be feeling it, because they're having to deal with broader issues and may not have that depth of knowledge. So again, just to sort of conclude with that part, it may be that, possibly you're not impacted, but do you have that facility to deal with the impact of the stuff that you're out there with? Is there a pressing need to? If the firm's making money, lots of firms are quite content to move forward with making the money the way they're used to making it. They're not feeling enough pain, if you will, to acknowledge and address those forces.
Okay, I have another question. Based on your legal experience, I realize that there are many variables, but if a large law firm is looking for a new CRM system, which vendor would you recommend?
Oh, that's a loaded question, Bob. It really would come down to, what are you looking to accomplish with CRM? I would say the solutions that we have on hand, between what Lexis is doing, Salesforce is doing, and Microsoft are doing, and the iterations of that come out from the other providers, all offer very strong CRM solutions. It's more, what is the specifics that the firm, what is the strategy that the firm is looking at, and using that as the lens to address which one would work best for you. And I realize that's a very vague answer, but part of it's just our nature, and we work with all three vendors, so I don't want to be prejudicial one way or the other. But it's also, I fundamentally believe it really depends on what it is you want to achieve. And from there, each of these solutions can be tailored to work to fit that strategic need.
Okay, great. That's it for questionings. Once again, Jeff, thank you. Great presentation, and to all of you for attending today's webinar. We look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Everyone have a great day.